Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you once again. Had a robust discussion about the Democrats' efforts to knock third party candidates off the ballot. How's that going to work out? We're going to be having more and more uh, discussions about that issue that issue and so many others as we move toward the Democratic and Republican conventions. It's going to be interesting, and the Green Party is going to have their convention. This is going to be a really exciting 2024 election season, and you're at the center of it. Everybody's vying for your vote. And you know what? So much of our Supreme Court decisions happen within a social context. The Brownie Board of Education happened within the context of Black people coming back from the war, men and women, the Second World War, not wanted to go into the war because of the lynchings, because we lived in Jim Crow, because of the horrifying circumstances that Black people had to endure in the United States. But we went and we had a double V. It was victory at home and victory abroad. So you had that. And so you had Emmett Till that happened years later. Then you had the Brown v. Board of Education decision. You had the modern civil rights movement. All of that happened within a particular social context. And there's a social context in which so many of these Supreme Court decisions are happening now. And the Roe v. The Roe v. Wade decision was, that precedent was overturned within a particular social context. And now we're trying to figure out what to do about Mifepristone, which is a drug that does much more than resolve miscarriages. It does much more than induce the terminations of pregnancies. There's a lot to it. But there is a social and political context that we're watching as we see this issue argued before the Supreme Court, whether women will have access to this medication or not. More than 60% of abortions now are performed. You use mifepristone. It's not a surgical procedure anymore. It is now, these are tablets that you take. So, what does all of that mean? What does all of that mean? And we're going to be talking about that with Dr. Damon Arnold, the former head of the Illinois Department of Public Health. He's a veteran, a scholar, and one of the world's foremost public health experts, and then one of the most brilliant historians of American history, someone who helps us to contextualize what we're talking about and thinking about all the time, from the University of Arizona, Dr. David Gibbs. What's the name of your book that should be out very, very soon?
It's called Revolt of the Rich, How the Politics of the 1970s Widened America's Class Divide.
Wow, I cannot wait for that to come out. I cannot wait because we need to talk about that because because real wages haven't moved since then, right?
I'm sorry?
Real wages have not moved since the late 70s.
They've that's right. They've basically been stagnant. Living standards, in some respects, have gone down. For male workers, the average wage actually has declined. And so for most people, I would say things have gotten worse since the 1970s.
Well, and I mean, there were a lot of things that were established in the 60s and 70s that are being overturned in the 2000s. So we're looking at this discussion that we are now having about mifepristone and really about reproductive rights and a woman's physical autonomy and what our rights and responsibilities are. And so we've watched this Supreme Court, which is very conservative. They have approached this discussion, many people say, with a fair amount of skepticism, but we will see. It's their second blockbuster abortion case in the past 3 years. So this is an issue that is that's really at the forefront of America. We just saw in a red state a candidate win on wait a minute on being pro-choice in Alabama. So talk to me. What are we seeing in the Supreme Court right now as we see the second blockbuster case in 3 years It seems like we're trying to see if they're going to crack down on nationwide access to mifepristone, this drug that has been used to resolve miscarriages. That is also it is now the drug of choice. It is the method of choice for terminating pregnancies. They're not. It's not necessarily a surgical procedure anymore. Dr. David Gibbs.
Well, as I understand it, the mifepristone basically saw a tremendous increase in use during and after the COVID pandemic, since people were reluctant to go in person to see their doctors. But you could do, telemedicine, and through telemedicine, women could get prescribed mifepristone and could abort that way safely, in most cases safely. Obviously, Dr. Arnold can give more details, I'm sure, on the medical aspects of this, but that's my understanding of what has happened here. And this has become now the major source of abortion in the United States. Clinical abortions now are secondary to mifepristone. For most people, it's kind of a godsend in the sense that it just makes the painful decision and experience of abortion easier and less complicated. And the FDA, I believe, has allowed it for again. Dr. Arnold can give more details here, or correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's 10 weeks. 10 weeks into pregnancy, you can use mifepristone reasonably safely, and that's the recommendation. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe this can be done in states that have disallowed clinical abortions. I believe that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a way around the recent decision, basically, essentially eliminating the right to abortion in certain states. So, from the standpoint of freedom of choice, that women have choice in this matter, this is a good thing, obviously. Everybody knows an unwanted pregnancy can ruin your life at any age, especially true for teenage girls and teenage boys, for that matter. And, this can help a lot of people in a positive way, in my view. There is this big socially conservative movement that isn't just anti-abortion, as you noted, many people are, but against the right to abortion. In other words, you may yourself, take the view that abortion is a bad thing, therefore I won't do it. But this goes much further and says we should not allow other people to do it as well. That's always been a big part of the conservative movement. I think it's been used very cynically by the Republican Party, including many people who didn't really care much about abortion rights one way or the other, saw this as a way to win sort of socially conservative votes. I think big business saw this as a way of sort of linking up socially conservative issues with economically conservative issues and getting both at the same time. I think that so it's been very heavily funded, again, by people in many cases that weren't themselves socially conservative. Many business interests saw this as a way to advance sort of economic conservatism and redistribute wealth upward, which is what they did. And so the Supreme Court, which has been leaning much more conservative over time, including with the recent appointees that Donald Trump has put there, they do have a conservative majority. But my understanding is, at least the preliminary statements being made during the hearings on this, indicate that they are unlikely to actually outlaw mifepristone. We'll see what they do, but that's my understanding, is that they seem to be leaning against that decision. So there's a limit how far they want to go in advancing the sort of anti-abortion rights perspective that they seem to have been advancing up till now.
But what is the context? I mean, help us to understand what is going on in America, because when we've had these Supreme Court justices or these nominees, they were asked pointedly, will you overturn Roe v. Wade? Will you upend this precedent? And they all said, oh no, which many of us said, I don't believe you, but I'll go with it. And they overturned it. What happened?
I assume realpolitik, these are people who are very much part of the conservative movement, steeped in conservative ideas through the Federalist Society and other sort of training organizations that have been set up at law schools, again, by people with a lot of money. And I think the main objective of the Federalist Society is economics. That's what the wealthy people who fund these things are really interested in, is economics. But I think they view social conservatism as a vehicle to gain popular support among larger groups of Americans to win elections. And so, social conservatism is also part of the agenda. And so I think that, we have an increasingly politicized Supreme Court. You could say it's always been politicized, but now I think more overtly than before. And, you have a Republican majority in the Supreme Court. People don't like to say that, but that's what we have here.
Mhm.
And anti-abortion rights is very much part of the Republican position. Obviously, it's very hard to imagine Donald Trump himself is personally opposed to abortion.
For years,
Uh,
he wasn't.
that's right. That's right. He wasn't until he was. And it's true with the whole conservative movement. As a matter of fact, if you look in the 1970s, abortion, opposition to abortion rights, well, first of all, support for abortion rights was widespread in the Republican Party. Betty Ford, the wife of
Gerald
President
Ford,
Gerald
our
Ford,
first lady. Yeah.
she was pro-choice and proudly pro-choice, and that was a normal position of the Republican Party. I think what happened was two things. One is that the only place where you had significant opposition to abortion, that, my understanding, is among Catholics, right? Not Protestants yet, but Catholics
Mhm.
opposed abortion. But I think many sort of conservative activists, people like Paul Weyrich of the Heritage Foundation, saw abortion as an issue they could use to mobilize vast numbers of people. And so they largely created the idea that abortion rights is an issue that Protestants should be concerned about. And that was a new idea. And so I think he managed to drum up support of, or I should say, opposition to abortion rights among Protestants and link them up with Catholics. And that produced a huge number of voters who were anti-abortion rights. And it brought a lot of people, including a lot of people who previously voted Democratic, to the polls. It helped elect, Ronald Reagan, for example. Um, and so I think the Republican Party ever since then has seen this as an issue of value to the party. I'm not sure that's true anymore because the public increasingly, majorities of the public now are overwhelmingly in favor of at least some degree of abortion rights. And sort of the extremist position of no abortion rights at all, that's a decreasing minority in the United States. So I'm not sure it's so functional for the party anymore. They seem to be losing more votes than they're gaining, at least in recent elections. Nevertheless, it's become so steeped in the Republican Party. The Republican Party has been so steeped in anti-abortion rhetoric. It's very hard to turn around. And you have all sorts of minorities influencing American politics. On Israel, you have APAC on
Mhm.
Cuban relations with Cuba. The Cuban lobby, and in this case, you have a very large and vocal element in the Republican Party that it's anti-abortion. That even though the public, I think the majority favors some kind of abortion rights. Now, to what degree that's controversial, but some degree of abortion rights are favored by the vast majority of the public. You have this minority that's very vocal in the Republican Party and really has a lockhold on the party at present. And so even people like Trump, who I suspect at his heart he favors abortion rights. I'll be frank. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Trump had arranged for abortion for women at various points throughout his life. It wouldn't surprise me a
Mhm.
bit. But nevertheless, consistency has never been his forte. And so, he sees this as a way to appease the sort of hardline, socially conservative element within his party. And so that still has a lot of influence, and it has influence in the Supreme Court. But clearly, it would seem that there are limits to how far they want to go with this. And so it appears they're unlikely to stop the use of Mifepristone.
Mhm.
So they may not go all the way with this. We'll see.
Hmm. Dr. Damon Arnold,
Yes.
help us to understand what are we looking at? I mean, because I think it's important to understand the political context in which all of this is happening, because the Supreme Court they don't make decisions, Dr. Gibbs, Dr. Arnold, in vacuums. That they don't. They happen within social and political and cultural contexts. That having been said, actual lives are on the line. So, number one, well, just help us to understand women and pregnancy and the challenges, because if a black woman uh, is in line for death in the United States, and indigenous women get pregnant.
Yes.
I mean, our maternal mortality is through the roof. And I would say for white women too in the industrialized world, I mean, we have unreal rates. What is What are the first of all? What is mifepristone, and what are the challenges that women face when they find out they're pregnant?
Okay.
What I mean, what? Because it seems to me to be a physically daunting enterprise.
Yes, it really is. Well, medical abortions, they have a term they use, medical abortions, to cover those which are, induced by chemicals like mifepristone. So it's really a combination of things. So medical abortions are preferable really to the physical abortions such as vacuum aspiration or dilatation and curettage when they go in and remove the tissue. So it's really a surgical procedure. So this is really a medical procedure where a woman takes a medication in order to, complete an abortion.
Well, why is that preferable?
Because, well, it's preferable because you have several things. When you start talking about people who are in rural areas and access to adequate health care, there still is an obstacle for people who are poor, people who are African American, Latino, or Indian Americans, and poor white women as well. They're directly affected by this. So they don't have access to a clinic. We have the long historical thing about backyard abortions and alleyway abortions and that kind of thing in the past, which we don't want to see again, caused a very high death rate among women who were attempting that due to infection and bleeding, subsequent to them using a coat hanger or whatever instrument that was devised to do that by some unscrupulous people. And so the medication abortion is not, it's not suitable for everyone. I must say that up front. So some people have things like they're taking blood thinners with chronic doses of steroids, corticosteroids for asthma. We know we have a really high rate of asthma in the African American community. For example, Inglewood in Chicago, 4 times the national average. So asthma is something that is occurring in the community, especially poor communities. And then also people who are allergic to some of the ingredients or chemicals that are being used. Those are sort of contraindications. So there still is a role for surgical abortions, and women have to be aware of that. If you have some really uh, known medical problems that are severe, that you need to really think about contacting your provider, before taking this road. And you've been on long-term steroids in particular. So that being said, it's actually been shown to be safe not only in the first trimester, but the second and third trimester as well. So that's really where the anti-abortionists started trying to punch a hole into the picture and saying that, oh, that these are used for medical abortions, around the world. And if I have a couple of statistics for you, but if you look at the United States, about 63% of the abortions in 2021 were due to medical abortions. In other words, they were taking these medications. But when you look at Scotland, it was 99%.
Wow.
When you look at England, it was 87%. Norway, 95%. So in the European nations, this is practiced at a much, much higher rate. Excluding Spain, which is about 25%, Italy, 35%. Canada is about 37%. But 63% is a significant number, as Dr. Gibbs was mentioning earlier. That is something that it shows you that people are looking at this as being an alternative treatment that's going to help them. So mifepristone is a drug that blocks a hormone called progesterone. And what progesterone does is it prepares the lining inside of the uterus so that you can actually implant an embryo. So once you have a fertilized egg and it's moving around in the uterus, it actually implants in the wall at a particular area. And that progesterone actually helps that. So what the mifepristone does is it blocks the action of progesterone and thins out the lining inside of the uterus. so this embryo cannot implant. So now it's still there. It's just that it hasn't implanted. It's been blocked. So this has to be used with another medication. And the other medication is misoprostol. And misoprostol, what that does is it actually causes uterine contractions. It causes the blood vessels to engorge in the uterus and in the cervix, and it allows you to sort of have a contraction forceful enough to expel this embryo so that it leaves. So that completes the abortion. So normally what you do is you take it, it could be in the cheek or under the tongue. It's a tablet. You can even have vaginally, put it in vaginally, but I would recommend it more for a medical provider to do that if you try to do that course, because you don't want to lose it and have an incomplete abortion, right? So mostly it's oral medication that's being taken, and it's being taken in the privacy of your home. You don't have to really seek a medical provider. It's been shown to be safe and effective. And so both medications, so the first one you take, and then you take the second one, the misoprostol, 24 to 48 hours later. You have to wait at least 24 hours up to 48 hours. If you do it any earlier, it decreases the efficacy. The efficacy of using those two medications together to induce an abortion is 97%. Huge.
So in 2024, when I look at these industrialized nations where they are, this is really the method of choice.
Yes.
How did we miss this in the United States? What happened here?
Well, in the United States, we have the Food and Drug Administration that sometimes presents a hurdle, and we sometimes, sort of badmouth the FDA about, prolonging use of certain medications. But they did stop one medication. It was actually a woman who was in charge of the FDA back in history, who, and Dr. Gibbs probably knows more about the history than I do, but it was thalidomide. And thalidomide was used to make, pregnancies much better. You wouldn't have the pain and all those things you were going through, the symptoms of pregnancy. However, it also caused teratogenic effects, which means that it induced, abnormalities in the fetus where they lose arms and legs and those kinds of things. So the FDA does have its purpose. There is a safeguard you need, and when you're trying new medications and those sorts of things. But the medical community knew about this for some decades. We had actually been using that in people who had Cushing's disease, who also had diabetes, type 2 diabetes, to control their blood, because the cortisol level is really high, causes your blood sugar to go out of control. So we had been using, the Mifepristone previously in other medical conditions, but not specifically as an abortifacient, where we're inducing an abortion. And,
well, let me ask you this. I mean, is that what's standing between American women and Mifepristone? Politics?
Well, it is right now in the Supreme Court.
Now, as a physician, how do you feel about that?
Well, the thing that really kind of got me a little bit, upset about it in a way, is that the people who are bringing this suit forward are physicians, are people who are medical practitioners who are anti-abortionists. And what they're allowing to happen is they're allowing the political process to enter medical judgment. And it really has no place in it. The medical judgment should really be guiding it with studies that are done that are showing the efficacy and the safeguards about the utilization of medications. A lot of companies have been pulled on the carpet lately about, side effects from different medications. Was your study done correctly? Double-blind studies, those kinds of things. So I think there's a place for politics to enhance the experience of people who are going through the medical field, but not to dictate practice. I don't go into a courtroom and tell the Supreme Court how to rule their laws, right? What laws to rule, what books to use to come to the conclusions. And I think it's an infringement on that relationship that you have in a medical care providing position. That's why, physicians actually and healthcare providers have one of the highest trust ratings, right? Because you're working with them and you're trying to help them to get through something that's really terrible. And for someone to step in and intervene in that process, if you're a physician and you don't want to do abortion, then that's your prerogative. Don't be involved in it.
And don't do it.
Don't have someone else involved in it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's my particular viewpoint on that. There's some other things that are out there. They used to use, methotrexate, for example, instead of using the mifepristone. And the methotrexate actually is a chemotherapeutic agent. What it does is it stops the cytotrophoblastic formation. It's like the part of the placenta that's actually allowing the fetus to get blood and get the nutrients it needs from the mother, from the circulation, right? So that actually can cause teratogenic effects on it, right? And then also, where it causes deformities and things like that in the fetus.
So the pregnancy would be resolved. You could give birth, but the child would have physical impairments.
Correct. And then and that's if you have a missed abortion, right? And so that's why what I recommend is that when women do this, it's first of all is very safe, in the first 10 weeks. If you're going to the second or third trimester, go and have this medication administered by a medical professional, in a clinic or in a hospital, wherever you get your medical care from. But for the first trimester, it's been shown to be very, very safe in the studies. The actual complication rate is somewhere between 0.1 to 0.05%, which is like 1 in 1,000, 5 in 10,000 of side effect complications. So the complications rate is very, very low. It's actually safer as far as the death rate than taking Viagra for those people who are out there taking it.
But you know what? It's funny. We don't have these discussions and debates about Viagra.
Right.
I mean, really, and it's amazing to me that this part of a woman's life is part of a political debate. I mean, and now you're seeing, what do they say? Politics makes strange bedfellows.
Yes.
One moment, Doctor, because I'd like to get your feedback, Dr. Arnold. But first, you, Dr. Gibbs, because we just saw in Alabama, we saw in Kansas, white women who are conservative who said, this is a bridge too far. What's going on? I mean, because it seems that even beyond people's political affiliations or their philosophical affiliations, there's something about this particular issue that is galvanizing to women. And the majority of them end up favoring choice.
That's right. Well, when I've been on the show before, I've often focused on the dysfunctionality of the Democratic Party, but obviously it's in both parties. And one of the ways it's reflected in the Republican Party is they really are clinging to this issue, a sort of a hardline anti-abortion stance. Well, the public is moving away from that. And as you've noted, a large number of Republicans, especially Republican women, now do want some degree of abortion rights. And they feel strongly about that, sufficiently strongly that some of them are indeed bolting the Republican Party. And for the first time, they're voting for the Democrats. I think there are other things as well. I think that, Trump actually is a turnoff to some Republicans, particularly better educated. It seems to be women with higher education and higher incomes are moving rapidly towards the Democrats. And this is undoubtedly one of the issues that's driving that process. I think there are others too, but that certainly the abortion issue is one. So this is something that the Republicans continue to cling to, even as it's been demonstrated to cost them votes. But there's plenty of dysfunctionality to go around. I mean, on the Democratic side, I think that the Democrats have taken an overly also a dysfunctional position in the sense that what the polls show, as I understand it, is the public strongly favors abortion rights in the first trimester, which is where I believe more than 90% of the abortions occur anyway. Very few occur in the second trimester. And so I think if the Democrats were smart, they would say we favor firmly favor universal first trimester abortion rights, but de-emphasize second trimester because the public isn't so enthusiastic about that.
No.
And honestly, personally, I would feel a bit queasy about the idea of second trimester abortion. I have no problem with it in the first trimester. But second trimester, it makes me personally feel a bit queasy. I'll just put it that way. I think a lot of people feel that way. I think a majority feel that way. And so, if the Democrats were smart, that's what they would do. But I think there's such an ideological rigidity on this that it has to be all or nothing. The Democrats do not want to compromise on this issue, and they're also losing votes as well. Something else is kind of pitched, the way they're pitching the issue. I think for most people, especially working class people, abortion rights are a practical necessity. You need them sometimes when you have an unplanned pregnancy. Because in the real world, you have unplanned pregnancies, and you can't always bring the pregnancy to term. So you need abortion rights for yourself, and again, as I mentioned, for your teenage daughters as well. And so that's the way most people see it. But the Democrats put in abstract terms, a woman's right to control her body. I don't think that really resonates that well with a lot of people, especially working class people. I think it does very well with women who have advanced degrees and high incomes, which is the Democrats' main constituency now. And so naturally, the way things are presented on this issue, as in all others, is pitched to that constituency. But that's not that big a constituency. And the Democrats have, I think, lost votes on this just because they pitch this in a way that's designed to reach people like me, or at least women who are counterparts to me.
Look, as a woman,
high incomes.
As a woman, I can speak to this.
All right.
Educationally and all of that. And some of my friends from Howard University and we're Howardites. Oh, that's right. That having been said, and many of them, because I was pre-med in college, many of them are physicians now. We either went into medicine or show business, kind of sort of like I did for a bit, right? And nobody, and we're all, at least my particular crowd, were very religious people. Now, we don't evangelize and proselytize to people. We don't do that. But I'm going to tell you, abortions make us queasy. But what we will not do is judge you, because that is the hardest decision. No woman walks into that decision lightly. And what you do is you have a lot of sympathy and empathy, and you say, God bless you. And I wish you well on your journey. That having been said, there is no space in this discussion for someone like me. Mm-hmm. And that for me is problematic. I mean, because I am not someone who's personally affirming of it. But what I am is affirming of your right to have it and to be able to have it safely. That for me is, and I think that's where you get a lot of women who are like, wait a minute, hold it, wait. I'm not going to get in that with you because as a woman, I understand this is a big deal for you. Huge. And I'm going to support you. And I don't think you should die because of this decision that so many women have done. And then I don't think you should die trying to have a baby. I mean, there's something about all this that's really off here. Because American women, white, black, brown, yellow, and red, are dying more than anybody else in the industrialized world. And black women and indigenous women are dying more than anybody. So while we're having this discussion over here, and I look at these the so-called industrialized nations, and they have access to all of these medicines that help them to resolve this issue healthfully. I don't have access to it, and I'm trying to figure out medically what the AMA is doing, what the NMA is doing. I mean, I want to know what the medical association is doing. I want to know what the politicians are doing. I want to know how, as a woman, I don't have to die trying to figure this out. Right. Because it seems to me increasingly, Dr. Arnold, women are dying. trying to figure out how to resolve a pregnancy, what to do in the first 10 weeks, 12 weeks, what to do, please. And many of these women, you can't afford, even when you have great insurance, you will go broke trying to stay healthy in America.
Yeah.
It's the number one driver of bankruptcies, trying to stay healthy with insurance.
Here's one thing, one insight, with that, and from the political side, it's really interesting to me that they are so avid, trying to empower themselves with being able to control the women's right for abortion. At the same time, they're trying to knock down the Affordable Care Act. They're trying to stop you from having access. So are they trying to kill you? I mean, what's the purpose behind what they're doing? And,
no, that's not. I mean, truly, that's what I'm trying to figure out, if that's what they're trying to do here.
And the Mifepristone, misoprostol combination is like about, it's 96.6% effective. Some people say 97%. And one of the things is that if you have, misoprostol alone, what they're finding is that, the people who have that will have about 15% more likelihood of having to have a subsequent surgical procedure. So my thing is that if these pharmaceutical companies are selling this medication or allowing it to be prescribed under formulary, they need to come up with some serious, spot-on educational materials for women who are going to do this. They need to be fully informed and know exactly what to look for. What are the most common side effects, like abdominal, stomach cramping, uterine cramping, back pain, diarrhea, dizziness, headache, nausea, or vomiting can occur. Those are probably more common things, but the less common things are, excessively heavy vaginal bleeding. And there are some side effects that you really need to go in and seek medical attention if they're happening to you personally. And we know how the medical system, we had one doctor who was in Indiana. She had recently passed away. She went after, giving birth to the hospital, told them what she needed. She needed pain medication. They refused to give her things and she died. And she's a medical professional. So even when we are more on the educated side, it depends on how people are perceiving who we are. And I know that Dr. Gibbs is aware of this historically about the miseducation in history, right? We have people who really are just so uninformed and misinformed about what happened in this country. Most of the people can't pass a citizenship test. They would lose their citizenship if we brought them in front of a panel today. They really don't understand how the country was formed and formulated. We have, the father of obstetrics and gynecology was doing, unanesthetized surgical procedures on slaves. I mean, so, and we still consider that person to be the father of, OB-GYN. So I think it comes down to people really understanding that this is not just about, anti-abortion. It's about human rights and your sanctity, your personhood, of who you are, and your ability to be free. They'll grab the Second Amendment for the gun, and grab the Second Amendment for the freedom of speech, but the Fourth Amendment, let's drop that for by the wayside for a while. But selectively picking things that help their cause, and in the meantime, they trample on the rights of these women and actually doom some of them to death.
Well, I mean, and that is why what I'm seeing, and that's why it's very interesting to see this conservative court react so skeptically. If one listened to the arguments, it seems like they might affirm a woman's right to have access to this particular drug. And I'm wondering what might be coursing through the minds of these conservative justices. Is it the politics? Is it realpolitik? Or, I mean, what is going on here? Because it just seems very uneven. This is the same court that overthrew Roe v. Wade.
Yeah. I think
Yes.
The only thing I can come up with, and I mean, we have this expanding, and I can't, I was in the military, so I looked at these different things that are going on, and even the Vietnam War wasn't really. If you look at historical recollections of it in modern history books, they really don't cover it in the correct way. The truth is really not told a lot about some of the things that were done, or why we did certain things. Why did we enter different wars? Why did we, and so with that, coming up to the present time, I think people are they become so misinformed that they don't know really where to turn. The expansion of executive power is like going off the hook right now. The expansion of the Supreme Court's power is just unchecked, it seems. When it came to the point of, when we talk about Clarence Thomas, for example, but, several of them have done this. But when you're taking money and doing things and working with constituents that you're actually going to decide a law on that's going to affect us nationally, and we have no transparency on that. And then you come back and say, well, no one should be able to tell us, to monitor us. We can do that ourselves internally. And that's not the right answer. That's why we have a legal system, right? We don't monitor ourselves. Well, I didn't mean to steal all the money from the bank. I only took $1 million. I didn't take $1.5 million, right?
Yeah.
I just have a problem with the way that things are structured right now, and the fighting between the Democrats and the Republicans. I'm a Democrat, but I see some things that are being talked about on both sides to certain degrees, but I feel like there is too much polarization right now. It's polarizing the people, and it has brought us to the point where we're even talking about something like this.
Well, I mean, as a physician, should this be something that's in the public square? How should this be handled, in your opinion?
Well, I think it should be. My thing is that I thought, and Dr. Gibbs can jump in on this and correct me, but I always felt like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which were actually built on Iroquois principles, the Iroquois Indians, but those things were written for us to be able to be participatory in the government. When I came back from my first tour in Iraq, someone was asking me, they said, "What are you doing over there? Were you over there, to make sure Bush got his oil and that kind of thing and that kind of thing?" And I said, and I told them, I said, "It doesn't matter to me." And they said, "What do you mean it doesn't matter to you?" And I said, "I rose my hand to defend the Constitution and the public places of debate and discussion, and for you, the people, to make sure if a war is unnecessary, it doesn't happen. But if you weren't participatory in that process, why are you even asking me a question? What were you doing to stop it from happening?" And I went over because I'm more of a, I don't believe in killing and all that kind of thing as a medical person, and treated everyone the same, whether they were considered enemy combatants or whoever. And so more of a conscientious objector in that kind of sense of thinking. But it's the people need to be involved in this process. And thank God people are starting to speak up now, but we need to see more than talking heads from the politicians on TV, and have the rights groups and that kind of thing. The only time I see the people who are really pushing for the rights of the people are in demonstration lines in front of the Supreme Court, and I'll ask them 3 questions. Well, why are you here? Well, I think I need to do this, but no really serious engagement in the process to the point of making sure that things are in alignment with what the people are saying. And as Dr. Gibbs had mentioned, that probably most people in the country are supportive of this. And it's, why is it that you're making a different decision than what the people say if you're their representatives and that they put you in office to do this?
But and most of us do not know that in other countries that this is routine, that there are other drugs that are available,
Yeah.
I mean, most of us still have locked into our minds. I mean, Americans, we've been denied information. I'm not going to call this backwards because I think when we're given the information, we make advances. But the information, as you know, as I have about 5 minutes left here. A couple of minutes, Dr. Gibbs, the information is being withheld from us, and that is not facilitating us making the best decisions, Dr. Gibbs.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of information being withheld. I think one of the most important pieces of information that's being withheld is the United States stands out among all rich countries as having essentially the worst healthcare system among the wealthy countries. It's if you look at things like life expectancy, infant mortality, maternal mortality, it's way lower than it should be, and we spend more on our healthcare system per person than any rich country. So it's the worst of both worlds. It's really astounding how bad it is, and I think that's often being withheld from people, and people still cling to this idea that we're America, we're the greatest, and how could it possibly be better in Sweden or Canada? I couldn't imagine that. And how could it be better in Costa Rica or Cuba, for that matter? That's unthinkable, even if it is. And so you do have this problem of lack of information, a sort of, I'm not down on patriotism. Some people are patriotic, and that can be a good thing. Nationalism can be a good thing, in my view. Yeah. But in this case, it's kind of a dysfunctional nationalism that, you ignore the fact that we're not doing well in this area. We need to do better, much better. And we easily could if we wanted to. We just choose not to collectively. And I think one of the things that's also been a problem has been the culture wars, and that the culture wars have been used very instrumentally by elites to divide people. And, they're called wedge issues. They're a way of basically taking working class people and dividing them and preventing them from, voting their economic interests in many cases. It's, the abortion issue has been used very instrumentally by wealthy people to advance ultimately what are economic objectives, which is kind of a redistribution of wealth upwards. That's something I've seen very clearly in the historical records, especially beginning in the 1970s, is when it really got going. And it's very much with us today. And, a lot of the dysfunction of American politics does come from the very cynical exploitation of these issues, mostly by the Republican Party, although, as I've noted, the Democrats have mishandled them as well. And so, we have this lingering problem of disastrous health outcomes and people dying prematurely that don't have to die and shouldn't die sooner than they have to. And, that's kind of a stain on this country. And because of the political dysfunction, so far at least, we haven't been able to do anything about it.
Oh, it's an absolute stain because people are dying and they don't have to. And you're right, we're spending more money, but the money is just like we spend all this money on the military, but the enlistees don't get the money. Yeah. They're the ones who have to go to the payday loan centers and they're looking for public assistance. It's like, no, the contractors get the money. Right. No, the insurance companies get the money. And Americans are dying. We're dying. So where do we go from here? And how do we get more information out so that women know that they have more options, Dr. Arnold? It's not just Mifepristone. And in other countries, they're handling the termination of a pregnancy, the resolution of a miscarriage, because all of this is tied into a woman's physical health. Because as soon as a young girl, I'll put it delicately, becomes a young lady, she has to go to another doctor. Your days of going to the pediatrician are over. And if your menstrual cycle is off, your family are worried, not maybe because they think you're sexually active, but that's an indicator that something could be wrong with your overall health. This is a big decision for women.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Santita. And one of the things is that, we have a patient bill of rights that, you get from the hospital, and it's always given to people. And, what they do with it, I don't know, but they read the patient bill of rights, what your rights are, and those kinds of things. That's by law that you have to, administer that now. But we need to have a, maybe for this particular situation, a pregnancy bill of rights that every provider needs to be giving to their patient. And the reason is that a woman may be going to another doctor, cardiologist, an internist, as you were saying. You may even have people in childbearing age who are still seeing a pediatrician. I've seen that happen. And then also, as they're transitioning over to an OB. But there's certain things that women need to know, like no sexual intercourse 2 to 3 weeks after going through this procedure, medical abortion, because you're much higher risk of getting an infection because you just denuded your lining of your uterus. And then also 7 to 14 days after you've done this medical procedure, go and see a provider to make sure that it was complete abortion. And it's not used for ectopic pregnancies. So those are the things that women have to be aware of, that there are some conditions and things that they have to be still very vigilant and not just assume everything is okay. And if they have any side effects at all, they can call something like the FDA. It's FDA 1-800-FDA-1088 if they have any side effects, because their providers may not report them. There's been a long history of providers not, informing the FDA of side effects of medications. So that's something that you can do as a person on your own, is to contact the FDA, 1-800-FDA-1088, and then make and report some type of side effect. So I think it's the educational piece that must be part of this, in schools or wherever they have to get this information. In churches, they need to be able to give them this information and say, this is life-saving. It's not a matter of, you can have your own spiritual beliefs or your own political beliefs, but when it comes down to someone coming in front of you that could potentially die from something, you better put those things aside for a moment and start thinking, logically about what is happening in this person's life.
Well, no religion that believes, that points you to God, believes that you should be killed. Every religion is pro-life. So why don't we leave it there today? And why don't we have Medicare for all, so that everybody can have access to the best health care? Everyone should have access to their own physician. So many people do not. Everyone should have access to equal high quality health care. In America, we do not. We don't. In Cuba, you got a doctor literally on every block. They export them around the world. And we're trying to keep people out of med school and out of nursing school because of affirmative action. It is so crazy. But, may God bless you both, Dr. Gibbs and Dr. Arnold. Sending you so much love. I mean, look, it all worked out, didn't it, Dr. Gibbs?
Yeah.
And look at Dr. Arnold. There he is again. I gotta say goodbye to him before we go. Dr. Arnold, I'm sending you much love. I gotta go.
Thank you
now.
for the opportunity, and thanks for informing everyone. And Dr.
I cannot wait to have you back.
Your
nice
book
to see both of you.
Your book is my next book to read. Revolt.
It'll be great.
Okay. Give me the full name.
Love you all.
Thanks for having me on.
God bless you, everybody.
Okay.
Bye-bye.